Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 503, Hubris, How I Love Thee. This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by its listeners. Many thanks and much gratefulness to all of the listeners who have gone over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledged their support to the show. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you.
Well, hello. I thought I was going to have to record with the air conditioner on and that it wasn't going to stop because it is the hottest day ever outside. And literally, as soon as I said the name of the episode, the air conditioner shut off. So I probably have about 3.5 minutes to record the entire podcast. So, hi! Nothing's changed in my crafty life. I am still painting and especially trying to paint the ocean and water. I think it is actually cooling me off to surround myself with very, very pretty blues and greens and just pretend that my body is submerged in it, because I got out the door to go grocery shopping this morning at 5:30 and it was 81 degrees and 98% humidity, and I wept. It's just, as you know, not my favorite thing in the world. But we live in air conditioning because we are lucky people, and I'm certainly appreciating it today. Along with that, I wanted to give a huge shout out to editor Justin. We've actually, because the world is the way it is and life is as complicated as it is, I've actually been recording well in advance of when we've been editing and putting out the episodes. So I only just got to hear his finished episode 501, and I'm loving the sound effects and the transition things, and it's just so lovely. So I hope you're enjoying it as much as I did today when I finally got to listen to episode 501. Now we're all the way on episode 503. Time is already flying by. And yes, there will be a spot of hubris in today's episode. So listen for that. Not my hubris, not your hubris, something in the book. Speaking of the book, there are things to know for the chapter today. And some of them are pictured on the show notes at craftlit.com/503. Couple things, if you are new to the podcast, since we're starting a new book, or we have started a new book, we often get more new listeners. So first off, hello, welcome. Second off, if for some reason things should go sideways with the podcast, either craftlit.com goes down, or for some reason, wherever it is that you'd prefer to listen to your podcasts is not flying right by you, go to craftlit.libsyn.com, and Libsyn is spelled Libsyn. Unless something has truly, out of the ordinary, gone horribly, horribly wrong, that location will always work. So far, we haven't ever had it go down, and that's ever since 2006. So I feel pretty confident in saying you can always listen there. That is the company, Libsyn, Libsyn, that actually hosts the feed. That means that the show episodes are posted there. The MP3 files are posted there. They live there. They are distributed by the company Libsyn. And that gives us a lot of stability and security. The whim of the internet doesn't seem to affect Libsyn at all. Where things can go sideways is with iTunes. And Libsyn does a very, very good job of being as preemptive as they possibly can about avoiding issues with iTunes. So we can hope that things will continue in this vein. But if something goes wrong, craftlit.libsyn.com. All right, so book. Some seafaring language that you might need. Lugger, Lugger. This is a ship that traditionally has been used for fishing in Scotland, so that would explain how this wound up in the book. It has 2 or more masts and lug sails, Lug sails. It's a four-cornered sail, so instead of a triangular sail, it's more like a trapezoid, sort of. And the lug sail, as best as I can understand, because I am not someone who spent nearly enough time on the ocean, lug sails evidently were some of the earlier fore and aft rigs, and part of it is that with a lug sail you can kind of fine-tune just how much wind you can get, and it would allow you to not have to tack so broadly. Like you wouldn't have to do big zigzags to catch the air, to catch the breeze as you were trying to go in a straight line and having to zigzag to do it. This would reduce the amount of zigging and the zagging. It's interesting, too, because the name origin seems to be claimed by many. It might be from how easy it was to lug the sail up, or the name of the sea where these ships first sailed upon, or from the Dutch word Lugger, meaning slow ship, or the East Frisian term log, which means slow. So basically, it doesn't go super fast. It's kind of heavy, but it might be more efficient because of the way you can adjust the rigging. I don't know. Somebody will call in and tell us, I am sure, what the deal is and why it matters. I also found a site that claims that a lugger is a sloop, and I am fairly certain that that is not true. So what did we learn? We learned that Heather doesn't sail. And on that note, quadrant and sextant. I am not even going to try and explain this. I believe quadrants and sextants showed up in an earlier book, and if I did anything good in explaining them then, go back and find it and listen, because I'm not going to now. But I do have a really cool picture of one on the show notes. And that picture also links out to an actual source with actual information on how quadrants and sextants worked. These were nautical navigational devices. Quadrant came first, sextant came later. Two brace is another way to say two pair. So if you have two brace of anything, you've got two pairs of those things. Alow and aloft are nautical terms for below and above, which means if you look high and low, or you look alow and aloft, you have looked everywhere you possibly could. Their glim is their light, and you're going to hear that referred to specifically for a candle. So a glim, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's like a glimmer of light, not a whole lot of light, just enough. A dingle is a deep wooded valley. I love that term, and I'm going to try and find ways to use that forever now. And with that, we are ready to listen to chapters 4 and 5 of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Here we go.
Chapter 4, The Sea Chest. I lost no time, of course, in telling my mother all that I knew, and perhaps should have told her long before, and we saw ourselves at once in a difficult and dangerous position. Some of the man's money, if he had any, was certainly due to us, but it was not likely that our captain's shipmates, above all the two specimens seen by me, Black Dog and the blind beggar, would be inclined to give up their booty in payment of the dead man's debts. The captain's order to mount at once and ride for Dr. Livesey would have left my mother alone and unprotected, which was not to be thought of. Indeed, it seemed impossible for either of us to remain much longer in the house. The fall of coals in the kitchen grate, the very ticking of the clock, filled us with alarm. The neighbourhood, to our ears, seemed haunted by approaching footsteps, and what between the dead body of the captain on the parlour floor and the thought of that detestable blind beggar hovering near at hand and ready to return, there were moments when, as the saying goes, I jumped in my skin for terror. Something must speedily be resolved upon, and it occurred to us at last to go forth together and seek help in the neighbouring hamlet. No sooner said than done. Bareheaded as we were, we ran out at once in the gathering evening and the frosty fog. The hamlet lay not many hundred yards away, though out of view on the other side of the next cove, and what greatly encouraged me, it was in an opposite direction from that whence the old blind man had made his appearance, and whither he had presumably returned. We were not many minutes on the road, though we sometimes stopped to lay hold of each other and hearken. But there was no unusual sound, nothing but the low wash of the ripple and the croaking of the inmates of the wood. It was already candlelight when we reached the hamlet, and I shall never forget how much I was cheered to see the yellow shine in doors and windows, but that, as it proved, was the best help we were likely to get in that quarter, for, you would have thought men would have been ashamed of themselves, no soul would consent to return with us to the Admiral Benbow. The more we told of our troubles, the more, man, woman and child, they clung to the shelter of their houses. The name of Captain Flint, though it was strange to me, was well enough known to some there, and carried a great weight of terror. Some of the men who had been to field work on the far side of the Admiral Benbow remembered, besides, to have seen several strangers on the road, and, taking them to be smugglers, to have bolted away. And one at least had seen a little lugger in what we called Kit's Hole. For that matter, anyone who was a comrade of the captain's was enough to frighten them to death. And the short and the long of the matter was that while we could get several who were willing to ride to Dr. Livesey's, which lay in another direction, not one would help us to defend the inn. They say cowardice is infectious, but then argument is, on the other hand, a great emboldener. And so, when each had said his say, my mother made them a speech. She would not, she declared, lose money that belonged to her fatherless boy. "If none of the rest of you dare," she said, "Jim and I dare. Back we will go, the way we came, and small thanks to you big, hulking, chicken-hearted men. We'll have that chest open if we die for it, and I'll thank you for that bag, Mrs. Crossley, to bring back our lawful money in." Of course I said I would go with my mother, and of course they all cried out at our foolhardiness. But even then not a man would go along with us. All they would do was to give me a loaded pistol lest we were attacked, and to promise to have horses ready saddled in case we were pursued on our return, while one lad was to ride forward to the doctor's in search of armed assistance. My heart was beating fiercely when we two set forth in the cold night upon this dangerous venture. A full moon was beginning to rise and peered redly through the upper edges of the fog, and this increased our haste, for it was plain, before we came forth again, that all would be bright as day and our departure exposed to the eyes of any watchers. We slipped along the hedges, noiseless and swift, nor did we see anything to increase our terrors till, to our huge relief, the door of the Admiral Benbow had closed behind us. I slipped the bolt at once, and we stood and panted for a moment in the dark, alone in the house with the dead captain's body. Then my mother got a candle in the bar, and, holding each other's hands, we advanced into the parlour. He lay as we had left him, on his back, with his eyes open and one arm stretched out. "Draw down the blind, Jim," whispered my mother. "They might come and watch outside. And now," said she, when I had done so, "we have to get the key off that. And who's to touch it, I should like to know?" And she gave a kind of sob as she said the words. I went down on my knees at once. On the floor, close to his hand, there was a little round of paper, blackened on one side. I could not doubt that this was the black spot, and taking it up I found written on the other side in a very good clear hand this short message: "You have till 10 tonight." "He had till 10, mother," said I, and just as I said it our old clock began striking. This sudden noise startled us shockingly, but the news was good, for it was only 6. "Now, Jim," she said, "that key." I felt in his pockets, one after another. A few small coins, a thimble, and some thread and big needles. A piece of pigtail tobacco, bitten away at the end, his gully with the crooked handle, a pocket compass and a tinder box were all that they contained, and I began to despair. "Perhaps it's round his neck," suggested my mother. Overcoming a strong repugnance, I tore open his shirt at the neck, and there, sure enough, hanging to a bit of tarry string which I cut with his own gully, we found the key. At this triumph we were filled with hope, and hurried downstairs without delay to the little room where he had slept so long, and where his box had stood since the day of his arrival. It was like any other seaman's chest on the outside, the initial B burned on top of it with a hot iron, and the corners somewhat smashed and broken as by long rough usage. "Give me the key," said my mother, and though the lock was very stiff, she had turned it and thrown back the lid in a twinkling. A strong smell of tobacco and tar arose from the interior, but nothing was to be seen on the top except a suit of very good clothes, carefully brushed and folded. They had never been worn, my mother said. Under that the miscellany began. A quadrant, a tin cannikin, several sticks of tobacco, 2 brace of very handsome pistols, a piece of bar silver, an old Spanish watch, and some other trinkets of little value and mostly foreign make, a pair of compasses mounted with brass, and 5 or 6 curious West Indian shells. I've often wondered since why he should have carried about those shells with him in his wandering, guilty and hunted life. In the meantime we found nothing of any value but the silver and the trinkets, and neither of these were in our way. Underneath there was an old boat cloak, whitened with sea salt on many a harbour bar. My mother pulled it up with impatience, and there lay before us the last things in the chest, a bundle tied up in an oilcloth and looking like papers, and a canvas bag that gave forth at a touch the jingle of gold. "I'll show these rogues that I am an honest woman," said my mother. "I'll have my due and not a farthing over. Hold Mrs. Crusty's bag." And she began to count over the amount of the captain's score from the sailor's bag into the one that I was holding. It was a long, difficult business, for the coins were of all countries and sizes, doubloons and louis d'or, and guineas and pieces of 8, and I know not what besides, all shaken together at random. The guineas, too, were about the scarcest, and it was with these only that my mother knew how to make her count. When we were about halfway through, I suddenly put my hand under her arm, for I had heard in the silent frosty air a sound that brought my heart into my mouth, the tip-tapping of the blind man's stick upon the frozen road. It drew nearer and nearer while we sat holding our breath. Then it struck sharp at the inn door, and then we could hear the handle being turned and the bolt rattling as the wretched being tried to enter. And then there was a long time of silence both within and without. At last the tapping recommenced, and to our indescribable joy and gratitude died slowly away again till it ceased to be heard. "Mother," said I, "take the whole and let's be going." For I was sure the bolted door must have seemed suspicious, and would bring the whole hornet's nest about our ears, though how thankful I was that I had bolted it, none could tell who had never met that terrible blind man. But my mother, frightened as she was, would not consent to take a fraction more than was her due, and was obstinately unwilling to be content with less. It was not yet 7, she said, by a long way. She knew her rights, and she would have them, and she was still arguing with me when a little low whistle sounded a good way off upon the hill. That was enough, and more than enough, for both of us. "I'll take what I have," she said, jumping to her feet. "And I'll take this to square the count," said I, picking up the oilskin packet. Next moment we were both groping downstairs, leaving the candle by the empty chest, and the next we had opened the door and were in full retreat. We had not started a moment too soon. The fog was rapidly dispersing. Already the moon shone quite clear on the high ground on either side, and it was only in the exact bottom of the dell and round the tavern door that a thin veil still hung unbroken to conceal the first steps of our escape. Far less than halfway to the hamlet, very little beyond the bottom of the hill, we must come forth into the moonlight. Nor was this all, for the sound of several footsteps running came already to our ears, and as we looked back in their direction a light tossing to and fro, and still rapidly advancing, showed that one of the newcomers carried a lantern. "My dear," said my mother suddenly, "take the money and run on. I am going to faint." This was certainly the end for both of us, I thought. How I cursed the cowardice of the neighbours, how I blamed my poor mother for her honesty and her greed, for her past foolhardiness and present weakness. We were just at the little bridge by good fortune, and I helped her, tottering as she was, to the edge of the bank, where, sure enough, she gave a sigh and fell on my shoulder. I do not know how I found the strength to do it all, and I am afraid it was roughly done, but I managed to drag her down the bank and a little way under the arch. Farther I could not move her, for the bridge was too low to let me do more than crawl below it. So there we had to stay, my mother almost entirely exposed, and both of us within earshot of the inn. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Last of the Blind Man. My curiosity, in a sense, was stronger than my fear, for I could not remain where I was, but crept back to the bank again, whence, sheltering my head behind a bush of broom, I might command the road before our door. I was scarcely in position ere my enemies began to arrive, 7 or 8 of them, running hard, their feet beating out of time along the road, and the man with the lantern some paces in front. 3 men ran together, hand in hand, and I made out, even through the mist, that the middleman of this trio was the blind beggar. The next moment his voice showed me I was right. "Down with the door!" he cried. "Aye, aye, sir," answered 2 or 3, and a rush was made upon the Admiral Benbow, the lantern-bearer following, and then I could see them pause and hear speeches passed in a lower key, as if they were surprised to find the door open. But the pause was brief, for the blind man again issued his commands. His voice sounded louder and higher, as if he were afire with eagerness and rage. "In! In! In!" he shouted, and cursed them for their delay. 4 or 5 of them obeyed at once, 2 remaining on the road with the formidable beggar. There was a pause, then a cry of surprise, then a voice shouting from the house, "Bill's dead!" But the blind man swore at them again for their delay. "Search him, some of you shrinking lubbers, and the rest of you, aloft and get the chest," he cried. I could hear their feet rattling up our old stairs, so that the house must have shook with it. Promptly afterwards fresh sounds of astonishment arose. The window of the captain's room was thrown open with a slam and a jingle of broken glass, and a man leaned out into the moonlight, head and shoulders, and addressed the blind beggar on the road below him. "Pew!" he cried. "They've been before us. Someone's turned the chest out, alow and aloft." "Is it there?" roared Pew. "The money's there." The blind man cursed the money. "Flint's fist, I mean," he cried. "I don't see it here nohow," returned the man. "Here, you below there. Is it on bill?" cried the blind man again. At that another fellow, probably he who had remained below to search the captain's body, came to the door of the inn. "Bill's been overhauled already," he said. "Nothing left." "It's these people of the inn. It's that boy. I wish I had put his eyes out," cried the blind man Pew. "They were here no time ago. They had the door bolted when I tried it. Scatter, lads, and find 'em." "Sure enough, they left their glim here," said the fellow from the window. "Scatter and find 'em. Rout the house out," reiterated Pew, striking with his stick upon the road. Then there followed a great to-do through all our old inn. Heavy feet pounding to and fro, furniture all thrown over, doors kicked in, until the very rocks re-echoed and the men came out again, one after another, on the road, and declared that we were nowhere to be found. and just then the same whistle that had alarmed my mother and myself over the dead captain's money was once more clearly audible through the night, but this time twice repeated. I had thought it to be the blind man's trumpet, so to speak, summoning his crew to the assault, but I now found that it was a signal from the hillside toward the hamlet, and from its effect upon the buccaneers, a signal to warn them of approaching danger. "There's Dirk again," said one. "Twice. We'll have to budge, mates." "Budge you, skulk," cried Pew. "Dirk was a fool and a coward from the first. You wouldn't mind him. They must be close by. They can't be far. You have your hands on it. Scatter and look for 'em, dogs. Or shiver my soul," he cried, "if I had eyes." This appeal seemed to produce some effect, for two of the fellows began to look here and there among the timber, but half-heartedly, I thought, and with half an eye to their own danger all the time, while the rest stood irresolute on the road. "You have your hands on thousands, you fools, and you hang a leg. You'll be as rich as kings if you could find it, and you stand there skulking. There wasn't one of you dared face Bill and I did it, a blind man, and I'm to lose my chance for you. I'm to be a poor crawling beggar, sponging for rum when I might be rolling in a coach. If you had the pluck of a weevil in a biscuit, you would catch them still." "Hang it, Pew, we've got the doubloons," grumbled one. "They might have hid the blessed thing," said another. "Take the Georges, Pew, and don't stand there squalling." Squalling was the word for it. Pew's anger rose so high at these objections, till at last, his passion completely taking the upper hand, he struck at them right and left in his blindness, and his stick sounded heavily on more than one. These, in their turn, cursed back at the blind miscreant, threatened him in horrid terms, and tried in vain to catch the stick and wrest it from his grasp. This quarrel was the saving of us, for while it was still raging, another sound came from the top of the hill on the side of the hamlet, the tramp of horses galloping. Almost at the same time a pistol shot, flash and report came from the hedge side, and that was plainly the last signal of danger, for the buccaneers turned at once and ran, separating in every direction, one seaward along the cove, one slant across the hill, and so on, so that in half a minute not a sign of them remained but Pew. Him they had deserted, whether in sheer panic or out of revenge for his ill words and blows, I know not. But there he remained behind, tapping up and down the road in a frenzy, and groping and calling for his comrades. Finally he took the wrong turn, and ran a few steps past me towards the hamlet, crying, "Johnny! Black Dog! Dirk!" and other names. "You won't leave old Pew, mate, not old Pew." Just then the noise of horses topped the rise, and 4 or 5 riders came in sight in the moonlight and swept at full gallop down the slope. At this Pew saw his error, turned with a scream, and ran straight for the ditch, into which he rolled. But he was on his feet again in a second, and made another dash, now utterly bewildered, right under the nearest of the coming horses. The rider tried to save him, but in vain. Down went Pew with a cry that rang high into the night, and the 4 hoofs trampled and spurned him and passed by. He fell on his side, then gently collapsed upon his face and moved no more. I leapt to my feet and hailed the riders. They were pulling up, at any rate, horrified at the accident, and I soon saw what they were. One, trailing out behind the rest, was a lad that had gone from the hamlet to Dr. Livesey's. The rest were revenue officers whom he had met by the way, and with whom he had had the intelligence to return at once. Some news of the lugger in Kit's Hole had found its way to Supervisor Dance, and set him forth that night in our direction, and to that circumstance my mother and I owed our preservation from death. Pew was dead, stone dead. As for my mother, when we carried her up to the hamlet, a little cold water and some salts very soon brought her back again, and she was none the worse for her terror, though she still continued to deplore the balance of the money. In the meantime the supervisor rode on as fast as he could to Kit's Hole, but his men had to dismount and grope down the dingle, leading and sometimes supporting their horses, and in continual fear of ambushes, so it was no great matter for surprise that when they got down to the hole the lugger was already under way, though still close in. He hailed her. A voice replied, telling him to keep out of the moonlight or he would get some lead in him, and at the same time a bullet whistled close by his arm. Soon after the lugger doubled the point and disappeared. Mr. Dance stood there as he said, "Like a fish out of water," and all he could do was to dispatch a man to B to warn the cutter. "And that," he said, "is just about as good as nothing. They've got clean off, and there's an end. Only," he added, "I'm glad I trod upon Master Pugh's corns." By this time he had heard my story. I went back with him to the Admiral Benbow, and you cannot imagine a house in such a state of smash. The very clock had been thrown down by these fellows in their furious hunt after my mother and myself, and though nothing had actually been taken away except the captain's money-bag and a little silver from the till, I could see at once that we were ruined. Mr. Dance could make nothing of the scene. "They got the money, you say? Well then, Hawkins, what in fortune were they after? More money, I suppose?" "No, sir, not money, I think," replied I. "In fact, sir, I believe I have the thing in my breast pocket, and to tell you the truth, I should like to get it put in safety." "To be sure, boy, quite right," said he. "I'll take it if you like." "I thought perhaps Dr. Livesey—" I began. "Perfectly right," he interrupted very cheerily. "Perfectly right. A gentleman and a magistrate. And now I come to think of it, I might as well ride round there myself and report to him or Squire. Master Pugh's dead. When all's done, not that I regret it, but he's dead, you see, and people will make it out against an officer of His Majesty's revenue, if make it out they can. Now, I'll tell you, Hawkins, if you like, I'll take you along." I thanked him heartily for the offer, and we walked back to the hamlet where the horses were. By the time I had told my mother of my purpose, they were all in the saddle. "Dogger," said Mr. Dance, "you have a good horse. Take up this lad behind you." As soon as I was mounted, holding on to Dogger's belt, the supervisor gave the word, and the party struck out at a bouncing trot on the road to Dr. Livesey's house.
Okay, so we had a bit of drama, and that's always fun. Wow, people who live in the hamlet near the Admiral Benbow are chicken? Can you imagine? Yes, of course we can. Of course we can all imagine this. A mother and her child who have recently lost the father of that child, the husband of that woman, run into town, terrified, because big bad people are about to try and kill them. They need help. You know, a few people with pitchforks. They'll go out after Frankenstein, sure. But will they go help a woman and her son? No. I mean, there's the one kid who's like, well, I'll go get Livesey. Well, that's good. I mean, that's something. That's more than anybody else did. But seriously, Jim's father was too unnerved by the captain to ask for his perfectly reasonable fee for putting up this guy and pouring rum down his throat. But Jim's mom, dude, first off, goes and calls everybody chickens for not helping, and then goes back to the inn and with the clock ticking, knowing that the bad guys are coming for them, sits there and patiently, but specifically, counts out how much money she's owed. She doesn't want to take any more. She doesn't want to take any less. And I love that line that Jim cursed her for both her greed and her honesty. I think greed is kind of a harsh term at this point, But yes, she could have either bailed and said, it's not worth it. My life isn't worth it. My kid's life isn't worth it. But no, she could also have said, blow that out your shorts, dude. He's dead. I owed money and he was a complete and utter pain in the tuchus. So I'm owed, and just take off with the entire bag. But no, morals, ethics, this is the way things are. She's just got such a great spine. She is never named. This is pretty much the last time we see her. This is honestly pretty much the last time we see any women in the book, which, is what it is. But wow, okay, pretty impressive. And yes, she faints, but she's not somebody who runs, 5Ks every week. She is somebody wearing a corset who is going around the house, keeping track of things, making beds, keeping people, safe and tucked in a warm place where they can pour some rum down their throat. And just imagine how non-exciting her life has been up until this point. I mean, it's so easy, I think, to go, oh, right, she faints, because of course she does, and just blow it off as another example of sexism in literature. But I also think that's kind of unfair, well, to history, because it's not taking into account just how much more we're exposed to through movies and TV and literature and podcasts and all these various forms of entertainment that just wouldn't have been that common back then, which to me means that the realm of possibility, the realm of things that could possibly occur in my life or happen to me during my lifetime would be fairly limited. I will grow up, I will have a job, it will probably be hard, I will get married, I will have children and or not, and I will work at my job until I die. And aside from, going to church and getting a really good sermon every once in a while, or having distant family show up on your door, how much more exciting is your life going to be? I can see lots of reasons to hyperventilate. I can also see plenty of reasons why you might get a massive adrenaline rush during all of this. And the minute that you get someplace safe and have a chance to catch your breath, like under a bridge, I can absolutely see that the post-adrenaline crash could pass you out. It's a lot of stress. So, yeah, his mom faints, but I certainly do not put that in the category of, and therefore she's weak. And then the revenue man shows up. Okay, first off, this just rings like a biblical moment for me because, of course, tax collectors, vilified, hated, all of that. Revenue man, you're not really expecting to see him do anything good or to be particularly good, which is a horrible generalization, but I am fairly certain that that's why Robert Louis Stevenson put him in here at this point, because there's a lot of ethics and morals and value judgments and things that are made all the way through this book. And we've already heard some of those value judgments being made vis-a-vis Dr. Livesey and the captain. And now we have a little bit more subtle one hitting us at the end of today's chapters. The first hint I had that something interesting was happening was upon listening to this the first time. I absolutely, fully expected the revenue man to insist that young Jim must give the documents to him and he would take them to Livesey, putting himself, at least fictionally or motif-wise, into the position of being the guy who tries to cheat the kid out of what is rightfully his. I guess sort of rightfully his. But no, the revenue man is actually honest and says, I'll take you to Livesey. You're right. You keep those papers. Now, is he saying that because he knows that he would be the perfect and immediate suspect if anybody found out that the papers were valuable and then found out that he had made Jim hand them over and then they disappear and never get to Dr. Livesey? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe this is Stevenson playing on what he knew were people's stereotypes and just tweaking him a little. But you also have the fact that this guy, probably not the most popular guy in the area, just ran somebody over and killed them. Now, we know that Master Pew is a pretty lousy guy, and thus our title of How Awesome Hubris Is. And it's certainly possible that our revenue man just didn't want to risk doing anything after the running the guy over incident that might put him at a bit of a disadvantage with Dr. Livesey. Just don't ruffle any feather. The kid wants to go talk to the doctor. We know the kid. He's a fine, upstanding young man. He works hard. There's no reason not to take him to Dr. Livesey. It's not like you're going to offend Dr. Livesey's sensibilities by bringing a 12 or 13-year-old boy to him with some information. He knows Jim. Jim knows Livesey. Should be fine. So we just have a nice, honest guy. Kind of the guy you wish had been able to show up before all of the drama happened. But it's all working out. Looks pretty good. And Pew, who is so unpleasant, got run over by a bunch of horses and is now dead. And good riddance, I say to that pirate. However, Black Dog is still out there. Black Dog got away as far as we know. So, we don't know what's going to happen about that. That's part of the fun of Treasure Island. I have gotten some voicemails. If you have not been listening to old episodes, or if you are new to the show, we do have a call-in line, and you are more than welcome to call and leave messages or ask questions or disagree with me or present your own view of anything that I've said, or bring up entirely new ideas about things that are going on in the book, because y'all know lots of stuff. So share. The phone number to call if you want to share is 206-350-1642. That's 206-350-1642. Call now. All right. I'll talk to you next week. Have a great one. Bye.
Hello, Heather. It's Tara, Worcester-Wait on Ravelry and Worcester-Wait on Instagram. I was stuck in traffic on I-24 eastbound, heading into Nashville to pick up the husband from work. I was parked. There was nothing happening. We were stuck. There was a motorcycle accident about 6 miles up the road, so we weren't going anywhere. So I pulled up YouTube, looking for something to listen to, and lo and behold, there's a new episode of Crafty. I may or may not have scared the 3 cars around me when I Velociraptor screamed with glee that there was a new episode. And then again, when I discovered we're reading Treasure Island. I have wanted to read this book for years. I watched the movie twice, the old one, and I am over the moon to have another great book to stick in my ear towards the end of the summer here. I can't wait to start, and I'll talk to you later. I hope you've been doing great, Heather. Bye.
If you like what you heard, please leave us a review at iTunes, or like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter, or any one of a million different places that Craftlit wound up over the last 13 years. For more information on Craftlit, you can visit craftlit.com and subscribe via your favorite podcast app, or download the Craftlit app so you can get all of your episodes right there in your hand, all in one place, without having to hassle with anything else. So you can be sure not to miss any of Treasure Island. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on. Thanks.